Hello, Jamie. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I am doing so good, and I'm doing even better now that your book has launched,
Me
as I'm sure
too.
you are. I'm sure it's a big relief that this thing has finally arrived.
Yeah, it is a big relief. It's been, as it's a lot of work, and then there's a lot of hurry up and wait, which I'm not particularly good at. So
Neither am I, and yet this is the business I'm in. So who knows?
yeah, there you go. So
We have to train ourselves. So today we're having a conversation with you because it is your book we've launched it. It's
yes,
out. It's been in progress for quite some time. I am so excited about it. But before we kind of get into the information related to the book, I would love for anyone watching this to just get a little bit about who you are and a little bit of your background.
sure. My background is all supply chain. I did it at the corporate level. I did what's called indirect, predominantly, which is the infrastructure. So as a result of that, every type of company needs that. So it allowed me to kind of jump industries. And during my career, so I worked for a bank, I worked for a telecommunications company, I worked for technology, welding and medical supply, and my last corporate gig was heavy equipment rental. So in each of those positions, I was interacting with supplier diversity in some form or function, always. In the last corporate gig, I actually had responsibility for both. So I built out indirect supply chain, and I also built out their first supplier diversity program. And in 2017, I went out on my own and I started doing consulting in both of those areas. And one of the first things I started looking for was reference material that I could refer clients to kind of bring them up to speed or to give them a primer, if you will, when we were having discussions about building out a strategy. And there's a lot of stuff out there about diversity and inclusion. There's some pretty decent, some really good stuff, not a lot, but some of it's really good on the economics of supplier diversity. You put the dollar in this community and, it changes hands this many times and here's how many jobs it creates. But I was really looking for the business strategy of being able to go talk to the C-suite, of being able to engage and bring on board supply chain and so on. And that's where I was having difficulty. So over the course of my career, when I negotiate, I tend to use stories or analogies. And said over the years, you should write some of these on. They're really good, and it helps people see where you're trying to get to, and so on and so on. And so from that, then kind of came the seed of, if it's not out there, and I've sat on both sides of this desk, maybe I'll do something.
Which I love so much. And you and I have discussed this because my former life and how I kind of ended up in book publishing was having written books around LGBTQ, not necessarily workplace specifically, but around communications and marketing. And in that role, so often I would be having conversations with people who would think they're like, supplier diversity, like what is supplier diversity? Like that conversation would come up all the time. Yeah. And for a really long time, like this was probably back in like 2013, 14, 15, I was like, I need to write a book about this. And then it wasn't, it's not my thing. I'm not a supply chain person like you. And when we first were talking, I was like, oh my God, I have known that this book has been needed at least since 2013. And here it is. And so I'm so excited that you are the originator of this, because it's such a good primer in so many ways for anyone who needs to understand why this is important. And I know for you, business strategy is hands down kind of the key to that. But while we're like having this conversation, can you, and I know this is not always an easy task, but can you give just like a super high level of what we actually mean when we're talking about supplier diversity? Because I know what you're talking about. We speak the same language, but sure, someone who may not know might be a little bit in the dark.
Well, it differs from what you hear about diversity and inclusion, is because it's about the supply chain of an organization. So if you think about how important it is that you have diversity within your employee base, if you then take that and permeate that throughout your entire supply chain. so that all of your suppliers are either part of that community or they support that community. And by community, I mean minority, women, LGBT, veterans, small business. So really all the things that you're hearing so much about right now, quite frankly, it's about how do you incorporate those into your supply chain and get the same benefits through your whole supply chain organization that diversity inclusion gives you in your employee base.
I love it. I love it. So your focus on this is the business side of things, the business strategy side of things. So your entire book really kind of outlines the case for why this is something that organizations should be taking into consideration. And I know what I really love about how you approach this is with your cast of characters, because I think that you do it in it's like playful, it's informative, but like I really feel like it kind of creates like a concrete framework for people to understand, like, this is who has to be at the table. This is who has to be involved. Do you want to share just a little bit about how you came up with like this particular framework?
Sure. I think that what I had seen so often was that people treated supplier diversity differently within the organization. And when I say people, I mean the supplier diversity people, the supply chain people, the C-suite. And really, it's a business strategy. It's as much needed in a business structure as sound financials and a good marketing plan. But because it wasn't treated that way, it was very often thought and addressed differently. And so my take on it was, no, if you treat it like a business strategy, you can make the business case a lot easier. B, the people that you need to get on board are going to understand it better. And third and finally, these people will work better together. They'll integrate. So I did it with the 5 main cast members. And to my end, it's like you need these 5 people involved if you're going to be doing this. One is the C-suite, from which all authority and money flows. The supplier diversity professional, who has all of these others as internal clients, if you will, that they're trying to service. The supply chain professional, who has to see it as something that they need to accomplish their goals and objectives. The diverse business owner, who I really try and set up to not just be ready for a matchmaking session, but to provide the information that's going to be needed 2 layers past that matchmaking event. And then finally, the one that's overlooked the most is the end user of the company, who's actually selling and living with the solutions that are being purchased.
I love all of this. And so so for those who are watching this conversation, who are thinking, I don't really know what supplier diversity is, but I like what I'm hearing, I think I might want to explore that. Is this book really aimed toward that corporate type of structure where there's a lot of employees that are involved, or there's a lot of vendors that are being contracted with? Or is this also something that can be applied to a smaller business who maybe there's only a couple of employees, but they still have a good, decent supply chain? Like, is it applicable for both parties?
It's going to be applicable across the board. I really tried to build the book around informing all 5 of those areas. So whether it's a small business, whether it's a single person who just wants to know more about it, whether it's an end user who likes what they're hearing, but they want to learn more. Throughout the book and at the end of each chapter, I have little icons for each of those 5 cast members. And I have a message for each of those cast members at the end of the chapters to kind of wrap up, here's something you can do. I wanted actionable things. So yeah, I think it's relevant for any of those players to learn more about not just what makes it important, but how to be successful, and then how to engage and interact with those other cast members.
I love that, because I think that when I was mentioning before about, like, I feel like a book like this needed to exist then, I really feel like there's not a lot of information out there as it relates to the business owner, who is the one that's going after these contracts within kind of the supplier diversity space. And I've spent just a number of volunteer hours over the last well over a decade kind of educating business owners on why this is something that they should take seriously. And what I was very pleased by recently is that PYP is a certified B Corp, which was a grueling process, I will say. Like, we're also a women-owned certified business, LGBT-owned certified business. But getting that B Corp certification made the other two look pale comparatively in terms of the amount of information that they want around sustainability, social responsibility, diversity, supplier diversity. And I was so pleased to see their criteria that they require around supplier diversity specifically. So when I started applying for this, which was forever ago, and we recently back in May, I think were approved, I had to go through a lot of like rigorous pieces of the process to figure out how I'm going to build out a strong, diverse supply chain at PYP. Right. And it was just so great to see an organization like B Corp, who, kind of leads the way on sustainability, to have such a heavy focus on diversity and supplier diversity. I thought that was just fantastic in so many ways. And I don't know why I wasn't expecting it, but it was a very pleasant surprise.
Well, if you're going to be leading edge, as sustainability is in a lot of companies or a lot of industries today, you really need that diversity if you're going to be successful. And I think what's happening is people are picking up on that. It used to be you had to go into the organization, you had to win the hearts and minds, you had to, slog through all of the different departments. Now what you're getting is, I did an interview with a partner at Ernst & Young last year, and I was asking him about the people that are coming in and applying for positions within your organization. Mm-hmm. Do they expect to find diversity when they get there? And he kind of snorted and said, expect? No, they demand it. Mm-hmm. And if we're going to get the top talent, then we have to be able to demonstrate not just, hey, we're in favor of this, but how we're actually incorporating it into the DNA of our organization.
Yeah, I think that's the key, is like the embedding it into every decision you make, every approach that you take, having that kind of at the forefront, which I feel like at PYP, we are not a big company. There's 6 of us, and we get, we publish a good amount of books annually, but yet, even like, I feel like the message is that even for companies that are not that large in terms of like employee size, you should still be very conscious and intentional about securing vendors who are diverse in just any number of ways. So like our supply chain is very, very diverse, and it's intentionally diverse. And it was like that before having to go through the rigors of the B Corp process. But, just kind of, I feel like your book kind of helps gives the business case for it. It gives a strategy for it. And then it helps you kind of communicate and figure out, what do I need to do? And how am I going to go out doing it, regardless of your company size? And I want to encourage anyone who's watching us, regardless of how many people you have at your company, this is something that you should really take seriously before somebody mandates that you have to take it seriously.
Well, and you can also do it individually. Every time we spend $1, we're voting with our pocketbooks. So, one of the things that really resonated with me early on was, I try and incorporate that in every buying decision that I'm making. There are certain, when I put gas in my car, I go to companies that have a strong supplier diversity program. Mm-hmm. And if they don't, I don't buy gas there.
That makes 2 of us.
When I'm looking at, which cereal to buy, I'm looking at the manufacturers and the suppliers who I know support the things that I support. And, for all of the flack that social media is taking these days, one of the great things about it is that it really helps inform, and people can make informed choices because they know what those companies are doing and what they're not doing. The ones that are silent are just as much at fault as the ones who might be railing against it. Although there's fewer and fewer of those every day. But, every time you spend $1, you're voting.
Mm-hmm. And I want more people to understand that, especially people who are coming from marginalized backgrounds. So whether that's a person of color, an LGBTQ person, a woman, that we have so much power. We have so much collective power. And I will say, I feel like the LGBTQ community, and I might be biased in this statement, hands down does a much better job at communicating the message of what companies are good to do business with versus what aren't, because the HRC has had their buying for equality guide for, I don't even know how many years. It's been a long time. It's well over a decade at this point, probably maybe 15, 20 years, where they're like giving you the tool to say, and it used to be in like that little cute little booklet. Now it's an app. And it's like, if you have to go buy pet food, here's your two options. This is the one that supports diversity initiatives, which oftentimes supplier diversity kind of comes along with that. Yeah. And then here's the one that doesn't. So you make the informed decision on where you want to put your money. Yeah. And I think that for me, I haven't seen anything else in other communities that's as strong as that one, particularly in the LGBT.
And I would agree with that. I mean, I participate in all the different organizations because as a corporate member, I was a corporate member. So I was interacting with all of them. Now it's kind of part of what I do for a living too. So, I'm interacting and seeing what each of those are doing. There's very little crossover between the different groups and organizations. And that's really too bad because I go to these things and I see, ooh, they really got this nailed down, or they're really doing this great, or they have a great idea over here. But there's not a lot of sharing and, I think it's Justin with NGLCC. This is, rising tide lifts all boats. But it's not as good. But I do see in the LGBTQ community, I think they do it better than the other groups tend to.
Yeah. And I think it's just interesting. And even with that being said, I feel like there are still so many people within the LGBTQ space who don't know that resource exists. Yeah. And, I will fight with people over, Chick-fil-A. I don't mind naming names when it comes to some of the companies. I usually try to be diplomatic about it, but Chick-fil-A is unapologetically homophobic. Yeah. So I have no problem saying I will never ever, when they were building one in my town that I previously lived in, I was up in arms. I was like, I cannot believe you're allowing this level of hate to come to our community. And yet I see people who, it might be a queer person that I know that's eating Chick-fil-A. And I'm like, do you realize what you're doing? And sometimes they just don't know. And I'm like, how do you not know this? But I think we all have to remember that, I can't make someone feel wrong or shame for having done that, because it's our jobs, which is why your book is so important, to kind of educate people on, here's the choices, here's what exists out there. And we have to be informed consumers because, as you said, we're voting with our money. Yeah,
every time. And, I think you're right. I mean, I think a lot of times it's just not knowing or not thinking of it in that way. I mean, I know people who are very vigilant about what they're doing at work and then never think about all the money they're spending at home. So I think it's really just about tweaking that mind a little bit, that, what you're making decisions, and like it or not, rightly or wrongly, you're underwriting what they're doing if you're giving them business.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my God. I feel like we could go down so many tangents on this front. I get so passionate about this stuff. So let's talk about just the process of your book for a few minutes, if you don't mind. Okay. So how long would you say it took from the time that you were like, you know what, I have to be the person who fills this need that I did not see when I was looking for a book about this topic, to present day where the book is now? And do you have a copy sitting next to you that you can show up for a visual? You do. Love it. It's a thing of beauty. Again, I'm partial, but it's beautiful.
You should have seen me the first 2 days just sitting here gazing at it like I was flirting with it. The process for me began, the first moment was November of 2018. And what happened was I was in DC on business. My dinner date that I had scheduled canceled on me. And so I had a free evening in DC, and I went online and started looking at what's going on in DC, because there's always something. NGLCC, who's headquartered there, was having a reception, and they were also having a silent auction. And one of the offerings in the silent auction was PYP's Academy. And I honestly had never really seriously thought about putting pen to paper, so to speak. And I stood there and was reading. There was a little blurb there about what the Academy was about. And I literally kind of looked up and went, okay, let's see what you think about me writing a book. And I bid on it. And a couple of weeks later, I got a call, and I had gotten the academy, and there were some books that went along with it. So where do you want us to ship the books? In January of 2019, I think you and I had our first conversation. And I had not written word one, but I was like, I really just want to know if I have the goods or not. So we had a couple of conversations, and in February, there was an academy class beginning. And so I enrolled. By April, I was writing. And by writing, I mean, writing and then backspacing and mapping out. I'm a big easel user. So that was April of 2019. And I think I got the first draft of the manuscript in about October, I want to say. And then last week it dropped. So from a light in my eye to actual book for me was November 2018 to today.
So yeah, and what I want people to kind of take away from that is that that's just around a year and a half to go from here's this thing, I feel like I'm called to do it, to actually holding it in your hand.
Yeah.
Which not having written a single word yet, I think is really impressive, because some people, it takes them years to just get the manuscript written. And then there's another, 6 or 8 months or so to get it published. But I feel like that's so impressive. And is there any part of the process itself that you found to be unexpected, or that you found to be really exciting? I guess kind of either direction, whether it was oh my God, this was awful, or this was actually really cool.
Well, that depends on the day. Fair enough. I will say that going through the academy is the reason why it was done in a year and a half. If you left me to my own devices, I'd still be writing chapter 1. I mean, I honestly would be. So it was having that framework and that, okay, you do this, and then you do this, and then you do this. And it's kind of like when you're learning to cook, you don't know that something's hard to make. You just follow the directions, and voila, you end up with, never looks exactly like the picture, but it tastes pretty good. So that was kind of the same thing for me. I did enjoy kind of determining what was going to go into it. And then starting to write and fill in that process. So I had a table of contents before I had actual content. I knew what I wanted to cover. But there were days, the mistake I made was I would get up in the mornings and I would go, well, today I feel like talking about reporting. So I would write on the reporting chapter. And tomorrow would be like, oh, I feel like talking about the C-suite. So I would write on the C-suite. What I ended up doing through that process was I did all the fun stuff first.
I can see where this is going.
And then towards the end, it was like, oh my God, another day of metrics. I can't stand myself. So, if I were to do this again, I would find a better balance. I mean, I still like the idea of if inspiration strikes, then you should take advantage of that. But I would probably also craft out some space for the stuff that I know I'm not going to be so happy about spending the time on, so that you get a little bit of a balance there. Because by the end of it, you're pretty spent anyway. So it would be nice to have more. It would have been nice to have more stuff that I really loved talking about right at the end. But the whole process for me was pretty interesting, and I had to do a lot of research. And I thought I knew this topic inside and out. I found some surprises. So it was an interesting process for me.
Oh, that's awesome. And as far as just kind of the content in your, like you were saying, you had to do more research and kind of coalesce and really figure out what your point of view is and how you're going to teach this and kind of come up with that. Did you find that to be beneficial and valuable just from a business perspective for how you can then work with clients now that you've like really figured out how to distill this down in a, in a more concrete way, if you will?
Absolutely. And I think probably the biggest benefit for me was, even though I was aware of it on a global scale, I had predominantly worked on it in North America, particularly in the last 15 years. So I really had to bear down and do a lot of research on, diverse does not have the same definition in every part of the world. And so I really had to look at, there's a part in the book where I go through like all of the different organizations that support things. And, here's what they're about, and here's the stuff I saw I liked, and here's some stuff that maybe they could do better. But really getting into that has allowed me now to have conversations with companies, in the UK, companies in Australia, companies in Africa, because I'm much better versed in what those definitions mean to them, and how to interact that on a global scale.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so what are your plans? Like when you were thinking about like, I'm going to write this book because it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Other than being the one who fills the void, what, did you have some kind of like North Star that you're like, okay, once it's out, my intention is to do this with it? Or is that kind of evolving as we speak?
It has evolved over time. I think, in April of 2019, when I started writing, it was about, I think I've got something I can share that there's not a lot of. And that was really kind of the impetus. Throughout the writing process, as you get towards the end of it, on some days, it's like, oh my God, I just want to be done. And through the crew process was days when I'm like, I'm so sick of the sound of my own voice in my head, that I just want to go talk about something. Actually, I want to go hear somebody else talk about a completely different topic. But as that wore on, I started looking at it in terms of how do I incorporate it into my business? Well, part of what I do is I speak. So I've developed speaking products that go along with the topics in the book, to augment the other stuff that I was already speaking on. I'm now writing scripts to do a set of online learning modules based on the book, so that we can get out to more people at any given point in time. And then I'm also looking at it in terms of how can I use this to help both because I do corporate and the diverse business owner side of how do I, it's all one, but it separates in terms of what each of those need. And then of course, I'm supply chain first and foremost. That's what my career is in. So I really want to develop something that supply chain people can look at and have a greater appreciation for the fact that it's going to help them do their job better. This is not just something else that we've added to your list of things to do. This is going to make you more successful in your own career.
Yeah, I love that. And to me, one of the best things about a book is that it really requires you to have to really figure out how you're going to articulate what it is that you want to say. But the best part about having done that is now when you're writing out your scripts for your online trainings, I don't want to say it's a breeze because there's still obviously a lot of work that has to be done with that, but you've already done all the hard work because you had to really figure out the content structure. And now you're just applying that content over different types of mediums and formats. And that's really awesome.
Yeah. I mean, now, when I started to develop scripts and I got my easels out, and my whiteboards to write on, I started with the table of contents of the book because now I've got that guide to get me through. And then I would say too, learning how to develop that through the academy translates very well to creating speaker topics, to creating client workshops, and to creating online learning modules.
Yeah. Well, I think that's my whole approach is that if you're going to go through the pain and hassle and headache and all the things to get a book written and published, because it's not an easy process. There's a lot of there's really high highs and there's very low lows when it comes to publishing and writing. That it's like, if you're going to go through all of that work, let's be intentional and strategic about how you're going to reuse what you've done in every other format you can possibly think of, because that's, because it's leveraging what you've done in a really intentional way.
Yeah. Well, and you want, people absorb information differently.
Mm-hmm.
People learn differently. So, whether it's the printed word or it's Audible or it's Kindle or it's, or it's one of these that I can open the pages and look at, you want that to be there for people so that it really lays the groundwork to have the big discussion with them. If they've been through this, then in whatever format, then it's just going to help towards a quicker trip to the success line.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. And so as we're kind of like coming to a conclusion here, when you're like, how do you work with clients, I guess is what I'm asking. Do you have typical client engagements that you work with, certain types of organizations that you enjoy working with? Just so if anyone's watching in this and they're thinking, there's something here, but how would I work with Jamie?
Yeah. On the corporate side, it usually, and again, there's corporate and there's diverse business owner, and then there's supply chain and there's supplier diversity. So depending on what the need is, we do everything from building overall strategies to honing in on a very specific issue. So in supply chain, that could be a whole new strategy for indirect, or it could be we're bidding this out that we only bid out once every 7 years and we don't have any category expertise, so we need help with that. On the supplier diversity side, it's companies, if they're interested in starting, but they haven't really started a program yet, then we do an assessment that kind of says, are you ready? And if you're not, here's some things you might want to work on before you throw your hat in the ring. If you have an existing program, then is it going like gangbusters? Has it plateaued? Do an assess existing program and give feedback on that. And then depending on what we find there, then we try and tailor the solution for, the given needs of that company. So, in some cases, companies are looking at, they really don't know how to go out and engage or find or source. In others, they really need to sell it internally better than what they've been doing. In others, they're just trying to build a business case and get funding. So it really depends on what the needs are. But pretty much any aspect of that, then we sit down and we have a solution in place for how to get there, how to get from point A to point B.
I love that. So to me, what I heard is that regardless of where you might be orbiting the supplier diversity space, a conversation with you can yield kind of the path forward for whatever their particular need or problem is.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things I decided to do early on is first hour is always free, because people, a lot of times they don't know, I don't know if it's right or not. So I'm not really know if I'm willing to spend money on this. But after the first hour is then, okay, and then let me shoot you some ideas and then you decide, which direction you want to go in. So that's one thing that we've done. The other is we have a corporate rate, and then for diverse owned businesses, they get 30% off.
Love it. Oh, that's so good. So we have had your website scrolling along the bottom of the screen the entire time, but are there other places or things in which you would like to send anyone watching to in order to check out what you are up to?
You can find it on my website. You can also connect with me on LinkedIn. And I'm very active on LinkedIn, so I'm usually posting, here's what I'm about. The website gives you both information about the book, also on the speaking and learning. It's called Rich Talk. It's a tab that's on the website. And then we have one for events when we're all back to doing that again. Or even the online where we're posting, here's where we're going to be, or here's where you can find us.
That's good stuff. And then, of course, your book it's available on the Publisher Purpose Press website. It's available pretty much wherever you can find a book. Wherever books are sold, you can find the book. At this moment in time, at the time of this recording, Amazon is a little bit slow in terms of the shipping when it comes to books, but most of the other bookstores and places where you can purchase books are a little bit faster. So if you want access to this book quicker, by all means, feel free to check out Barnes & Noble or other sites such as that. And then, of course, it's in an ebook too. So if you want instant gratification, it's available in an ebook. So, and that is available on all the places as well. Good stuff. I'm so happy that your book is here. I feel like we've given birth to it together. And it's just one of those things that, to me, it's the best part of the process, right? Is that, it's the best part. The second best part is like that first conversation of like, what are we doing together? How are we going to make this thing magical? And then the real best part is like, this thing now exists and it's a thing of beauty and it's going to help a lot of people.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
That's the hope. I want it to make a difference.
Yes, of course. Well, thank you so much for your time. It was great chatting with you. I hope those, who are watching learned something, because I feel like even I did. So at the very least, and if you're interested in learning more about how to leverage supplier diversity in your business or organization, now you have an absolute resource and expert to go to.
Thanks, Jen. I appreciate it.